So, what do you think about that gospel? It all worked out in the end, but does it kind of trouble you a little bit? We have Jesus being silent and even saying something that seems to be totally against what we would normally expect. It's not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. The greatest teacher is usually the one that is the most difficult, is the one who is truly a pain. Think about in your own experience growing up. Who are the teachers that you remember? Think about that person. Maybe think about the kind of challenge that they gave you. The people that you learned from the most. Not always necessarily the nicest, but the ones that you truly learned something. I have two different teachers that I think of. One, we'll call him Mr. Bob. Mr. Bob, super, super nice. But Mr. Bob, you could figure out the answer to any multiple question on any of his tests if you just tried. You just come up and you say, Mr. Bob, I'm struggling with this one. He's like, okay, well, let's think about it. I'm like, well, I'm thinking that it's probably A, but I'm not sure. He's like, well, keep thinking on it. I'm like, okay, thanks, Mr. Bob. Well, I know it can't be all the above. He's like, yeah, usually isn't that one. I'm like, well, there's still B and C, and they're so close, but if I choose maybe C, it's like, well, keep thinking. I'm like, I know what it is. I bet it's B. He's like, circle B, get 100%. Thank you, Mr. Bob. But, okay, but as I look to see my great teachers, Mr. Bob is not necessarily one of them. It was easy to get an A, but I didn't learn anything. There was no stretching. There was no trial. There was no difficulty. But then there's Dave. And I used to say with my friends behind his back, he was the evil Dave. And he was my AP senior English professor. And when I went into senior year of high school, I thought that it would be the easiest senior year because most of my classes were jazz band, symphonic band, madrigals. So most of my high school experience was we didn't really have homework, we just sang and played the drums. But then I had this one AP English class, but it turned into be like 10 classes because Dave, I won't give you his last name, but he would have us write these papers every single week. And remember, we're high schoolers, and he's delving into philosophical literature, and we didn't even know what the word philosophy meant, and he's like going into these deep, deep things, and he's having us break apart Emily Dickinson poems, and really tough stuff. And so, we're writing these papers as high school students would, and we turn it in, and I get the paper back. The first one, it's an F. And I'm like, what's up with that? Like, I always get A's on my papers, but he just gave me an F. I've never had an F in my life. And he's like, okay, you can keep this grade. And he says, because your work is trash, it can't be published, it's not, it's fluff. You can keep that, or you can keep working on it. And you can always turn it in. And if it gets better, I'll always bring up that grade. So you can settle for coasting through and fail the class, or you can go through pain, you can go through trial, you can go through difficulty, and you'll be able to learn how to write. You'll be able to learn how to do poetry. You're going to be able to learn how to delve into some of these deep ideas that you can't really do as a high school student unless you go through that painful experience of discipline. And so, okay, did the next one, turned it in. It was a D. I'm like, okay, thanks, Evil Dave. At least we're getting a little better here. And I turn it in again. It's a C, and then a B, and then finally an A. And I spent so much time, and I remember just being mad at the Evil Dave. Because I was thinking, he's taken away my high school. I need to do things. I need to hang out. I need to go eat ice cream at McDonald's. And he's robbing me of that. And I resented it. Until the very end of that class. And looking back, starting to realize, he was the one that introduced me to philosophy for the very first time. I became a philosophy major later on. He's the one who introduced me to poetry. So the poetry that I write, in many ways, was because he took the time to carve that into me. And he taught me how to write, how to read, in a way that I never had before. And so he is in my mind, one of the greatest teachers, but one of the ones that I hated at that time. He truly knew how to lead me into greatness in English literature. That's what Jesus is doing here. The greatest teacher is the one who is willing to allow us to go through trials out of a deep love for us, because he sees the potential that's there. He sees the greatness that is that diamond in the rough that's hiding. And that's what he does with this Canaanite woman. He already knows her potential of being able to have this profound faith. And so the Canaanite woman is going through a trial already. Her daughter is tormented by a demon. We forget that point. This is not merely just, I can't see, I can't walk, but the nightmare of a mother having a child tormented by a demon. We can just think of mothers or fathers struggling even with situations of mental illness and just the struggles there. This is on a whole nother level. And so she's seeking the only one that can help. And what happens? Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Wow. That could have been something where she just turned around right there. Have you ever had that experience? Something's going on and you're just begging the Lord, and you're in a sense dialing him up saying, please, Lord. And you don't even get a voicemail. It's just, and you're just kind of like, Lord, I thought you cared about me. But then it gets crazier. Not only did Jesus not say an answering word to her, but it says, then Jesus' disciples, the ones who are supposed to be helping him proclaim the good news, his very ministers, start saying, get her out of here. She's bugging us. So there's this whole nother level. And maybe this is something in which sometimes maybe we experience the profound hurt from even those that are called to be the church's ministers. That's another thing that could have just pushed her away, saying, wow, if this is what the people who are sort of the professional helpers with Jesus are saying, send her away, then I don't want to come here. And then he finally does say something. But he says it to the helpers, to the disciples. He says, guys, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In other words, it seems like he's affirming what they're just saying. Because the Canaanite woman is not one of the sheep of the house of Israel. She's outside of that covenant. She's a Canaanite. They're the people of Israel came in, and Joshua in the Battle of Jericho and all of that pushed the Canaanites out. When the Israelites were then captured by the Babylonians and then sent into exile, guess who came back in? The Canaanites. And now once the people of Israel come back, the Canaanites are mixed in there as well, and they resent that. And the Israelites would call the Canaanites dogs. The word actually is like puppy or pet, but not one of the children. And that comes into play, it seems, in what Jesus says later on. But notice what happens here. The woman, in all of these different roadblocks, it seems, these different moments in which could have easily been moments for her to say, I'm getting out of here. The woman comes then to Jesus, falls down on her face in homage, which means she recognizes who he is. This whole experience, this whole trial of faith is actually bringing this fire of love deep within her to say, I know who you are, because she even says, Lord. She doesn't say master. She doesn't say teacher. She says Kyrios, which is Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. That's the name of God, actually, in Greek. The translation of the Hebrew, Yahweh. She's saying, I know who you are. I'm still going to come towards you. Even though it seems like I'm getting all these roadblocks, even though it seems like the very church's ministers are getting in the way, even though it seems like I'm not hearing any response, I know that you came to save all of us. And you love me. Whether it seems like there's some darkness there that's not allowing me to see that, I'm going to just keep on marching towards you. But then, in the midst of this, then Jesus says something directly to her, but it seems like maybe not the thing that you would expect. It's not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. I mean, well, what would you do? If you're trying to go to Jesus, you get silence, you get the church's ministers getting in the way, you get Jesus seeming to agree with them, and then Jesus speaks directly to you when you ask personally, and he says, I'm sorry. You're not one of the children, you're one of the dogs. I mean, wouldn't you just say, enough, I'm getting out of here. But look what she says. She doesn't give up. This whole experience actually creates this deep, 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 powerful fire within her of love. This faith that is just conquering any darkness. It's like the experience of these trials is like bringing out this light, which is just casting away anything of the enemy. And she's just like, Lord, I know that I'm nothing. She knows who she is. She's like, I'm nothing without you. Yes, I'm like a dog without you. But still, I know who you are. I know that you are love and mercy itself. And so even though it seems like everything is going against me, I know that you are using all of this to bring me into your arms. And so I say, Lord, even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their master, saying, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word. My soul shall be healed. My daughter's soul shall be healed. And then everything that seemed to be the roadblock, everything that seemed to be totally what we would not expect, falls down. And she's able, through that experience, to see the deep face of the Lord, looking at her with profound love. I just imagine Jesus just rejoicing, being like, wow, you were able to stay with this whole trial, and now your heart is like a diamond. Whatever you want, woman, because great is your faith. Whatever you want, your will has been purified to be totally in union with my will. And because of that, you will always ask rightly. You'll always ask what I want for you and what I want for my people. Because of that, you have the key to my heart. Whatever you want. And from that hour, the woman's daughter was healed. Do you see how Jesus is the great teacher? But the greatest teacher is not someone that just lets us coast. He's not Mr. Bob, who's like, hey, you can do this, you can do this. But don't we want that sometimes with Christianity? We just want just kind of Jesus and coffee. You know, just kind of hang out with Jesus, drink my coffee, nothing more, just everything comfortable. And yet, what does the Lord say? If you want to be my disciple, you have to be willing to pick up your cross daily and follow me. Whoever wants to gain his life has to first lose his life. So, how much are you willing to give to see Jesus' face? How much are you willing to give to experience the full joy of heaven that God wants for you? Because something that we forget about is that to the extent that we live our lives radically for the Lord here is to the extent that we're going to experience the joy of heaven. Because what happens here is that the Lord uses this purifying fire, these trials of faith, to actually stretch our heart. So then our heart can be filled to overflowing with the love of God in heaven. But there's a big difference between if you're just content with having a Dixie cup and have that be filled, and yeah, it's going to be filled and overflowing, that versus a giant vat. Do you see how you can experience heaven on a totally different way? You're all going to be happy, but there's happiness and there's happiness. How much are you willing to suffer here so that for eternity, forever, you will experience the joy beyond anything that you can imagine? That's what God is doing here. And that's why he's a teacher that we can trust. So whenever you encounter difficulties, struggles, things that seem like they're just like shutting everything down, plow through that and say, my Lord and my God, I love you. No matter what happens in this life, I know that you can work all things for good. You can stretch my heart through the suffering, through the darkness, through the betrayal, through the denial, through all those different things. You are love, and you can work all those things for good. So let's live out this radical Christianity, allowing our hearts to be stretched from the good teacher.